Yeah, I'm John Lucas. I've been turning or working in wood for 45, 50 years. I bought a shopsmith somewhere around 1982, I think it was. And of course, it's a lathe, so I got to turning. Although I turned for about 2 years, I never sharpened my tools because I didn't know you had to. So you can imagine what my turnings looked like back in those days. I remember I made a clock, and it was kind of like 3 beads. They looked like squashed pancakes. They were so badly turned. But I got lucky. I moved to Tennessee Tech University to be a photographer there, and the Appalachian Center for Crafts is part of their school. And when the Appalachian Center for Crafts first started, they had big name people in teaching turning, David Ellsworth and people like that, John Jordan. And the interesting thing was, when I first started turning on that shopsmith, I lived less than 3 miles from John Jordan. I had no idea who the guy was. When I moved to Cookeville, I finally met him. Now I'm 80 miles away from him, or was back then. So I really wish I'd met him earlier. But anyway, what happened to me was there was a guy there named Joe Looper. Joe was he was their maintenance man, but he was also a wood major. He was taking wood classes, and he had studied under all the big name people they were bringing in, David Ellsworth and people like that. Joe had a lathe that had a 54-inch swing. He could turn some massive things. But Joe kind of took me under his wings and got me from being a really, really, really bad turner to learn how to use tools. Joe had those 8-foot-long tools. He'd studied under Ed Moulthrop down in Atlanta, who made these vessels that were 4 and 5 feet tall and using these massive, massive tools. So I was really thankful that happened to Joe. And in fact, what really got me into it big time, they had started the Tennessee Association of Wood Turners, and they were having their symposium at our school, at the Appalachian Center for Crafts. And so Joe said, if you'll come out and be the photographer, we'll let you go to the symposium for free. I said, cool. Well, the demonstrators were John Jordan, Betty Scarpino, my mind just went blank, the guy from Kentucky that turns the candlesticks, Rudy Asalnik. I mean, how can you not get hooked on turning with those 3 demonstrators? It's like, holy mackerel. So once I went to that symposium, I learned about the Tennessee Association of Wood Turners and the American Association of Wood Turners, joined them both. It's all history after that. And about 20 years or so ago, I was in the dark room one day. We ran a full-service lab. I was a photographer for the university. And I was in the dark room working, and I get this call from Bob Roseanne, pretty famous turner back in the day. I don't know if y'all know him. He made Christmas ornaments. But he was working, he was a tips editor for the Journal, for the American Wood Turner. And so I get this call in the dark room, and it's Bob Roseanne. I didn't know he even knew me. And he says, how would you like to be tips editor? And I said, well, I don't think I can do it. And he says, oh, I know you can. You're a photographer. You can certainly redo the photos if you need to. So I was tips editor for American Wood Turner for 10 years. Well, that kind of gave me an inroad to get to get articles published. And so I've written, I don't even know how many articles, probably 40 or 50 articles over the years, and had a ball doing it. I just, in the last issue of Wood Turning Fundamentals, actually have 2 articles in the same issue. I thought they were going to spread them out, but I guess he needed to fill that issue up. I've got one on making Celtic knots for pens. I've developed a new way of doing that, where the wood that you use to has to match the curve. Cut it advantage we'll talk about more when we start doing the actual carving is when you do 4 legs, like I can run a file this way, or a file that way. See it because this is designed for a 20-inch lathe, but I've got a little stop right here, and this is held on with magnets. Of course, it won't fit this bed, but anyway, what you do is you slide that up there to where it stops, and you slide. This has got an adjustable arm on it. You slide that up until it touches the jaws. Now, what I can do is, well, get this out of here, and I do have a video on this. If you go to John Lucas Wood Turner, you'll see all of my videos. What this does is, if I want to leave this here, it swings out of the way and I can turn. It's held on with magnets, so I can just flip it out of the way. But anytime I'm turning that bowl, if I don't know where the bottom of the bowl is, I can slide that up there, go like this. You slide this in till it touches the bottom of the bowl, and that gap right there shows me exactly how thick the wall is. So there's no reason to ever, particularly when you're turning mortises, and you're turning your bowl this way and you don't know how deep your mortise goes, that tells you exactly. And it's so easy to build. I mean, I put magnets on there. This slides on. I've got that stop that screws on right there. This slides up there. Like I say, if I want to get it completely out of my way, I just pull it off and lay it over here. If it's not really in the way that much, I can just flip it like that and go ahead and turn and flip it back up and measure the thickness of the bowl. But anyway, I talked to them about it before I published it online and said, is this going to infringe on your patents or whatever? He says, well, he didn't really copy me per se. You obviously used actually I didn't use his, he used an idea of somebody else. They used to make a thing goes in your tailstock. It does that years ago. They quit selling it. But anyway, I thought I'd show you that because it's really, really handy. So I'm going to turn a natural edge bowl. I don't even know for sure if that's the center, but we're going to find out in a second. What I do when I do those, my phone over here, is I rotate it like this. Got a pretty good gap right there. So I want the high point to be the same. Right there, right there. Let's go just a hair more. There we go. And sometimes I'll try to figure out how to see where the low point's going to be to get those the same, but it's much harder to judge because everything gets in the way, So, anyway. And another thing I do is, this is a 2-jaw chuck. It's going to bite pretty solidly in there. There we go. And I haven't even turned this lathe on. Does it work, or am I going to be turning by hand? There we go. All right. I didn't bring my face shield, but I guess we'll be okay. I'll probably be all right. We'll check and see here in a minute. Lower that. Oh, okay, it won't go any lower. All right. I do a cut a lot of times. One of the cuts I do is a pull cut, and I like to have the tool rest pretty low, and a lot of lathes simply won't go down that low, or pieces get in the way when you're turning. Oh, okay. There we go. Now, another thing, when you're roughing out bowls, you can fight it. I find that if I have the tool on my hip, and I lock this hand, and I find where it is, and I use my left hand as just a fulcrum point. Even though that wood is trying to bounce like crazy, I'm not having to fight it. I'm not using any real effort. because I can control how big a cut I'm taking. You see, even out here where it's just barely touching, I'm using my body. Now we stop and move the tool rest in. You want as little tool hanging over as possible. Clayton was showing me a picture last night I did years ago of John Jordan turning with his belly button, no hands. He was showing that if you use the tool properly, it takes very little effort. You know, if you have it oriented correctly. I'm going to stand this way so I can talk and not get shavings in my mouth. But you can see that when I get out here, it wants to bounce the tool real bad. But if I have that tool on my hip, and you know, I can take just a few millimeters at a time if I want to off there, and it doesn't bounce. It doesn't fight me. Have a lot more control. This wood's going to be, it's plum, and it's surprisingly hard. So it's going to take a little longer to get this thing roughed out than I would like. But that was the only natural edge I had right now, out of wood. My friend Randy Trentham, his dad worked at Sevierville in a Pigeon Forge as a wood turner for 50 years. And Randy would do live demos a lot of times. And when people would kind of be, some guy'd be standing over here and be kind of a jerk, Randy would aim the shaving so it hit the guy in the face. I'm not going to do that to y'all. I want to get this really off-center part out of the way. Another thing that I teach is, I'm going to seat that chuck a little better. There we go. And I may have tightened up I'm using my drive center in my chuck. They say you're not supposed to do that, but it works fine. When you're turning at home and trying to do mass production projects, it's a lot faster to not have to pull the chuck on and off. So I just put the drive center in there and use it that way. Whoa. What? Oh, it ate into the wood. I thought I had it seated pretty good. Ideally, you want to possibly drill a hole through the bark. When you start, usually that two-pronged chuck will get through that. Turning using your body is really valuable, particularly when I get out here on this end where you're only hitting twice per revolution. It will really bounce the tool, but having the tool on my hip, David Ellsworth called it Turner's dance, where you're doing this. Another thing that I teach is when you're turning, when you're actually cutting, let's go hit that tool. There we go. There's a sweet spot on your flute as you're making your cuts, particularly if it's a new piece of wood and you just freshly sharpened your tool. You possibly changed something. If you'll rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise really slightly, you'll find that sweet spot where it cuts with no effort. And so that's what I'm doing when I start right here. I kind of find that sweet spot, and you see right now, it's cutting. I don't have to fight it. Plum wood tastes fairly good. Now what I'm doing, I'm watching back here to see where my tool is and how I cut it. When you're turning wood, using the tool is a lot like driving a car. When you drive a car around a corner, you're not watching the steering wheel. You're watching the road. Same thing here. You need to get it out of the way. Yeah. Now, another thing that you have to consider when you're making a natural edge bowl is I'm going to want this area sticking out. That's where my feet are going to be. So once we get this thing roughly shaped, which I'm going to do probably on the next pass. Yep, there we go. What I want to do is I want to decide how big my feet are going to be, how wide they're going to be. So I'm going to cut this down. Okay, so that's going to be my feet. I'm going to make them just a hair deeper. I've got to adjust this real slightly. I was showing Sammy last night, I have this real nice scar, 7 inches long, almost 3/8 of an inch deep. I had my bowl gouge, I had just sharpened it, I was doing something, and I went like this, is all I can figure. Hit that bowl gouge on my arm, I didn't even feel it. I looked down, there's blood squirting out. So I grab the nearest rag and slam it on there and go running in the house. Say, we got to go to the doctor. With these new sharpening tools we're all using with CBN wheels now and stropping and whatever, the tools are unbelievably sharp and they will really cut you. So I've decided my feet are going to be that big. I want to look again and see, because this is going to curve down like that a little bit more. And I may need to make my feet narrower to compensate for that. So there we go. Now what I do a lot of times is, because you can't really do a push cut, you're going to hit the tailstock. I start it as a pull cut using that wing, and as the shape starts to progress, what I can do is I can lift the handle, and right about here I can now turn it into a push cut, and I have a lot more control of the shape. speed up a little bit. A little bit better shape right up there. Okay, we're getting there. Just got to fine tune it a little bit. Move the tool rest in just a little bit more. The locking mechanism for the tool rest is getting in my way. All righty. We should be there. That's good. I'm not going to do a lot of fine tuning because y'all are more interested in seeing how to do the feet. You've probably seen a dozen people turn a bowl. I am going to do some shear scraping real lightly right there. I didn't quite transition through that switch as well as I would have liked. But that's pretty good overall. That would easily sand out. I'm going to shape my feet just a little bit more. Just barely. There we go. And what I've done now is I've created myself a problem. I like to be able to turn the chuck to do the inside if I can. With my 2-inch jaws, they're not going to go inside this and grip it. So I'm going to change my feet real slightly. Make a dovetail shape. There we go. Okay, that'll work. What I like to do ideally, if I can, something like this, I'll make a tenon real small and I'll grip that tenon. That lets me turn into this area a little bit, which I'm not going to be able to do with this particular bowl. So we're going to save that for later. So now I'm going to hollow out the inside. Guess I didn't have enough Wheaties this morning. I'm a Vic Mark chuck fan. I've used a lot of chucks over the years, and they all work. But what I like about the Vic Mark is the jaws have a lot of range. So if you have 2 or 3 sets of jaws, like I've got 2-inch, 3-inch, and 4-inch, I can fit any size tenon or mortise because no matter which jaws I put on here, they expand enough to overlap each other in size. So don't have to be quite so picky about what jaw sizes I use. Now, one other trick, when you're mounting, did I bring a pencil? I probably didn't. Anybody got a pencil handy? Yeah. Anything that writes on wood. Okay, that's good. Wood compresses differently. You know, end grain compresses less than side grain compresses. And if your wood's punky, it can throw things off. So what happens is if I just put that on there and I orient it any old way, it may not line up perfectly. But if you'll take it, I'll see if I can zoom in on this camera. Yeah, there we go. If you'll draw a line parallel to the grain, you draw a line perpendicular to the grain, like that. Then what you do is, here's your pencil back. If you orient those lines so they fit in the gap between the jaws, like that right there, Now what I've got is I've got an equal amount of side grain and end grain in each jaw. So it's much more likely to stay accurate. Running perfectly true. I got lucky. But that's just a useful hint to you, I hope. I have robust tailstocks, or tool rests at home, and when he first came out with all of his tool walks, I was over talking to Brent at one of the shows, and I said, can you make, he had what he called mini tool rests that had a 5-inch post, and he had the big tool rest that had a 1-inch post. I said, can you put a 1-inch post on your mini tool rest? So, because I like to be able to wrap my fingers around it when I'm doing things like Christmas ornaments and stuff like that. He says, well, you're the third person today that's asked me that. He said, call me when the show's over and I'll make you one. So he had, the mini tool rest came as 12-inch. I wanted it 10 inches so it would match my mirror handles. I didn't realize all that was custom work. So my $49 tool rest cost me $89. But I'll tell you what, I use that tool rest more than any other tool rest. It is so useful. Ooh. If y'all had sharpened this thing, it would have cut the bowl and I wouldn't have to hollow it. Move it out. There we go. I'm going to do a couple different, I'm going to show you some tools that I use to get this started. Did it shift on me? I don't think so. I put a pretty small tenon on there, so I'm going to have to be a little careful. When you're hollowing bowls, I learned to start from the outside and go in, start from the outside and go in. Well, that works. The problem is, particularly at this point right here, I'm cutting directly into the side grain, in the end grain. It really fights you when you do that. I found that if you can cut straight down, I'm cutting across the grain, and it cuts much faster. Now I am going to, because it's got that bark edge on there, I'm going to start out here and get rid of that so I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I forgot that it creates so much dust when I do that. This is basically a dry piece of wood. So I probably shouldn't have started with that. But what I want to show you is a different tool. Once I get rid of this bark. This is a surprisingly hard wood. You'd think most fruit woods would be pretty soft, but it's not. What I'm looking at when I stop is the thickness of the rim. I want to be able to judge the wall thickness. I'm going to leave this one pretty thick. It's actually chipping off right there. I'll have to cut the bark off this one. One of the things that I like to do is I take all the bark off the rim and I use a sponge painting technique to decorate the rim. And if you use the right colors, it looks like lichen is attached to the bark. It's a really good technique, particularly when you have a wood that you simply can't keep the bark on. See, by cutting this way, I'm cutting across the grain. It cuts faster and easier. Now, I don't want to get it too thin because obviously everything starts to wobble at a certain point. So once we get it down there, I'll go a little deeper. A little bit more. Okay. One of the tools I was going to show you that you've all probably seen before or possibly seen is called the Hunter Viceroy. It has the tip on it is tilted down at an angle and goes to the left a little bit. It's a wonderfully easy tool to use. And these tools cut, they don't scrape. They don't necessarily leave a better finish than a scraping cut because of the way they're oriented, but this edge lasts forever because when you're cutting with a tool, it doesn't dull the edge like it does when you're scraping with a tool. So all the tools that Mike Hunter sells will work the same as the other carbide tools, but the edge will last many, many times as long. If you're interested in this tool handle, can't get it loose. It uses number 8 collets, like that. So you build yourself a drawbar, put that in there, tighten it up. Now I can slide that in. There's an article on how to make this. And you can buy these things in a set. You can get them from 1/8 inch up to, I think, maybe 3/4. And all you got to do is you loosen that up and you tap it, and you pull it out. You're ready to change bits, or if you're going to go sharpen a tool, come back, drop it back in. And I have an article on how to make these in Wood Turning Fundamentals. You'll notice my ferrule, dental floss. I did that by accident one day. I needed a tool really, really quick. I didn't have any ferrule material. I'm a rock climber. I know how to do things. So I lashed it with dental floss, and I put thin CA glue on. That was 20 years ago. I still use that tool today. So when I designed this process, this is PVC pipe. And when you draw this in, this is kind of a wedge shape. It pulls that wedge in and closes down, and that's how a collet works. I knew it would crack this PVC really quick if I didn't put a ferrule on. So I wrapped it with string, and it works great. But the nice thing about this tool is very little learning technique. You just push it in. The downside of any kind of scraping tool or tool that's used like a scraper, even though this cuts, is that the shape is determined purely by me pushing or pulling. In other words, when I use a bowl gouge, I can go through there, and by aiming the bevel, I can use this leverage way back here to control the shape. And I can get the exact shape I want. So you have a lot more control over the shape with a bowl gouge. But the nice thing about this is, again, you're controlling the shape, but you're doing it purely by eye. Because if I push in too far, it cuts. If I pull out, it cuts. And you can go in both directions. The downside is, throws the chips right back in your face.
Is it going to be worse about knocking bark off when you get closer to the outside?
Yeah, well, if you're cutting from the outside in, it's not too bad. Again, this tool's cutting, not scraping. So I haven't had any trouble with it so far. I don't use them tremendously because even though I've got most of Mike Hunter's tools and I love to use them, I'm so good with a bowl gouge, I don't use these as much as I probably should. Because they take so little effort, particularly if you have a piece that's really, really out of round. You can go in there and you can take the lightest cut, and I'm using 2 fingers. We'll try to do it with this tool by itself and see how it works. Now what I'm doing, I'm looking at the outside of the bowl, and by looking at the outside of the bowl, I'm moving the tool this way. I'm following that outside edge. And you can see I've got it reasonably accurate by doing that. I'm not measuring anything.
Hey, John, do you ever change the orientation of that tool?
Yep. The nice thing about when Mike Hunter first started making these tools, he sent several turners and said, what do you think of this tool? And the tool he sent me was this one. It's called the Hunter Badger. I realized immediately people were using it wrong. They were sticking it in the wood like this, and you're going to get one heck of a catch when you do that because it's a cupped tool. So, it's like sticking a skew in there without rubbing the bevel. I had been using hook tools and ring tools for years, so I knew how they should be used. So I turned it sideways and used it as a bevel rubbing tool, and it's incredible. It's one of my favorite tools. So I made a video, and I sent Mike the video. So ever since then, he's been sending me tools when he gets a new one that he's playing with, a design or whatever, and I'll play with it for a while. I have a metal lathe and a milling machine at home, so I might modify the tool, send it back to him, say, what do you think about this? And we go back and forth until he gets a good tool. And he's doing that with 2 or 3 other turners. I'm not the only voice in that method. But what I like about this tool, I use this as a bottoming tool. Everybody familiar with a bottoming gouge? What they do when you get steep-sided bowls, and this is not a steep-sided bowl, when you get a really steep-sided bowl, as you start going through the bottom, the shaft will hit the rim of the bowl. And you can't cut the bottom without rubbing the bevel, so you get a catch. So they grind them real blunt. They grind them 60, 70 degrees. When you do that, you don't get as clean a cut. This one is 60 degrees. Let me readjust my tool rest a little bit. But the outside bevel is 82. So I can cut across the bottom of a flat vessel, rubbing the bevel. See, my tool's almost straight out. This is my favorite tool for finishing the inside of boxes now, because I can finish the bottom of a box. It looks like it's been sanded with 600 grit with this tool. I don't know if y'all can see that or not, but see how glossy that is? And I pushed the tool a little bit fast. The other thing you can do with this tool is you can turn it sideways and use it as a shear scraper. The bottom wing does the scraping, so use it just like a shear scraper. So there's 3 techniques. This tool you can't use, well, you could use it to rough out. It'd be kind of hard. This tool, I can do the same thing. I can put it in here and rub the bevel. If I can find the bevel, there we go. Find the bevel, get a really, really clean cut. See it down there? Yep. So you can do that, or I could turn it sideways and I can shear scrape with it. So the same tool you can use in 3 different fashions. Well, I'm not going to get this thing real thin. I just wanted to show you all some techniques. Let's go back to talk about angles real quick. I put a 40-degree grind on most of my tools. I use this tool is not the best example because I'm changing the shape on it, so there's a whole bunch of bevels. Let me pull out one of the other ones. Yeah, here you go. What I do, I like a very, very small main bevel. The reason I do that is two reasons. One is to do the inside of bowls in particular, the perfect grind would be convex, so it follows the bowl. By getting rid of all this metal out here, which you don't need, it reduces the catches. It lets you feel the cut better. The one thing that I found I found out, I did a test the other day, and there's a video on that on my YouTube on grinding grits. I found out that you get the exact same quality of cut with a 36 grit wheel as you do with a 350 grit wheel. Does that blow your mind? It did mine. I was blown away when I found that out. So I started experimenting because I thought, well, maybe it's the wood or maybe it's whatever. So I turned 15 projects out of 15 different woods, everything from punky maple to ebony to hardwoods, things like that. And I would go to the grinder and I'd sharpen with 350 grit and I'd make a cut. I'd go to the grinder, sharpen with 36 grit, make another cut. I did that on all these things. Of course, I shortened my tools about that far over this project. But what I learned is it's not the grind that you use, or the grinding wheel that you use, it's how fast you push the tool through the wood. If you don't push the tool any faster than the wood wants to be cut, well, if you push the tool faster than the wood wants to be cut, you get tear out. That's slower than you think. For example, if I go through here, what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to feel the cut. I'm not putting any pressure on it. I'm letting it do the cutting. That's the speed I'm going at. You see how slow it's going through the wood? Now I can force the cut. I can do that, and you probably won't be able to see it on the camera, but the cut right there has got minor tear out. That cut where I slowed down doesn't have any tear out. Now, we talk about lathe speed a little bit. There's three things that affect the quality of the cut. One is how acute the edge is. The more acute the edge is, the cleaner it's going to cut. That's why I use 40 degrees whenever I can. 55 degrees works good on bowls that are steeper sided. 30 degrees would cut cleaner. I could use my spindle gouge possibly if I could rub the bevel. I get a cleaner cut. The other thing that gives you clean cuts, like I say, is not pushing the tool too fast. If you speed up the lathe, you can push the tool sometimes at a more comfortable speed. The problem is when you speed up the lathe, you create a lot more danger. So I can cut the same quality at 200 RPMs as I can at 1500 RPMs. I'm going to be moving the tool a lot slower at 200 RPM. I get real frustrated online because people are getting catches, and they're on Facebook, and they say, and somebody says, "Oh, if you're getting catches, you need to speed the lathe up." No, now you're going to be getting dangerous catches. The trick is to find out why you're getting those catches. Lathe speed has nothing to do with it. Now, on a natural edge bowl where you're hitting out here, the faster you can go to a point, the better it is because there's less time involved between that hitting your tool. So I'm going to make a couple more passes, get rid of this, because we want to talk about cutting the feet. Let's use this tool, I'll rough it out. I'll pass this one around. Don't look at that. Yeah, I didn't bring it with me, I don't think. Nope. The other tool that I like that Mike makes, well, here's the Viceroy, a smaller version. He makes three versions. This is the small one. This is the heavy-duty one. But you'll notice how the cutter's down and pointed to the left. It's really, really good for boxes and bowls and stuff like that. The one downside of carbide is if you bump that tool, you can chip it. I used one tool. Well, I used the tool that I'm passing around there, the Badger tool. I used that cutter for 2 years. Never changed it. Mike sent me some new cutters because I called him up and talked to him. Anyway, he sent me some new cutters. I put a new cutter on there, and it cut a little bit better, not tremendously. I took the old cutter and I looked at it under a 10-power magnifier. It was chipped like crazy. But the interesting thing is the chips kind of chip like napped flint, like an arrowhead. The bottom of the gullet is kind of sharp. So that's why it was still cutting, even though it looked horrible. They're amazing tools.
What's this one called?
That one's called the Badger. He used to call it the number 4. So when you go to my video on that, actually the video I have on that one is just called Hunter Tools because that was the first tool he put out. He changed it from a number 4 to calling it the Badger. Anybody has any questions on tools or anything else, feel free to holler it out. I'm a tool nut. You know, technically, with 5 tools, I can turn everything that I turn. I have over 100 tools. I love to play with tools and find out why they cut, how they cut, and the whole 9 yards. Now what I do on a bowl like this, where you got that natural edge, I'll show you using a bowl gouge. I go down through it, I make a cut, and I want to come back and refine that cut or make another one. What I'll do is I'll leave the bevel in contact. See, I can go back, I can find that edge. And that way I don't get catches because I'm already on the bevel. I know where it's at, and I know where it starts. We're going to stop here in a second, not make it any thinner, just so we don't waste so much time. We'll make a final pass of this. Actually, what I'm going to do is move the tool rest in again. There we go. Now another thing, even though I can't get my body in here, you know, if I move the lathe to the end where I could stand like this, you could use your body to do that hollowing. For a long time, I never had a lathe that the headstock would swivel or slide. And so what I learned to do was I locked my arm and I used my body. So that way I have more control. I'm going to go to a tool with a longer handle. There we go. Now the problem with a 40-degree grind versus 55 degrees, you can see right here, I'm almost touching the edge with my tool. So 40 degrees is as much as I could get by with on this one. Now one of the things I learned from Nick Cook, when you go across the bottom, if you have your gouge oriented like this, what happens is when you go across the center, it cuts. So now you've made a divot right in the center. If you rotate your flute so it's pointing exactly at 3 o'clock, when you get to that center point and goes across the center, see right now it's pointing at about 1 o'clock. Now I got it pointing at 3. When it goes across the center, it simply stops cutting and I don't get that little divot. That was a trick from Nick Cook. We'll call that done, even though it's not perfect. It's not bad. Got lots of bug in there. So let's talk about doing the feet. Whoops. That's how you chip the natural edge off. Ideally, I like to be able to get in here and turn away part of that. It's hard to do because the tailstock gets in the way. And you need to hold it to carve the feet. So what I do, one of the things, at home I use a vacuum chuck. Vacuum chuck is so much faster for this. The downside is, using the vacuum chuck, particularly on carving feet, is my vacuum chuck gets really, really hot, my vacuum motor, because it takes so long to cut those feet. So what I do is, I take the bottom of the bowl. I wanted to show you two things. One is, my friend Keith Tompkins made this thing for measuring the bowl thickness. You know, it's got these little marks up here. I can look at it and go like that and go, whoa, okay, it's a little thick out there, but not bad in there. You can turn it around and use it the other way, so it'll go in and measure right next to your chuck. You can really measure the thickness of bowls accurately with this thing. It's a great tool. Pass that around. When Keith invented those, he sent me one. He said, what do you think? And I said, well, I love it except for one thing. I'm an old man. I can't count all those black notches. I lose track. He said, why don't you color them? So you'll see when you pass that around, they're all colored. What I do is, I get one of these things, and I go like that. I've actually got a divot right in the dead center. There you go. Now, I compare it to this, and I've got a little bit of shaping to do on that. A little bit high right there. So I'll do a little shear scraping. This is just cheap pine, nothing fancy. What I want to do is match that shape pretty closely, and I may have to do it again. There we go. Yeah, still pretty high right through there. What I'm doing is shear scraping with that bottom wing to get this as close as I can to the right shape. And that's pretty darn close right there. Okay, then I use double stick tape or hot glue. Problem with hot glue is sometimes it can be really hard to get your bowl back off. Two purposes. If you don't put a finish on this, the hot glue is really hard to get off afterwards. You can use alcohol and sit there and wipe and scrape forever. The problem with you put finish on is, unless that finish is really, really dry, it won't stick to double stick tape. So. My sister insulted me one day. She said, do you have a knife? I said, you don't ask a redneck if he has a knife. You know he has a knife, you just don't know how big it is. I've carried a knife since I was like, 6 years old. And when I get on a plane now to fly somewhere, I feel naked not having that knife.
I've left two up to TSA.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate in that the one time I got into trouble for that, I was able to go out and get an envelope and mail it back to myself, and still got my knife. This particular knife is a Benchmade. I was down at a place called Cumberland Transit in Nashville, which is an outdoor store, and they had this knife, and it had a blade that I loved on one knife. It had a handle on another knife I really liked. So I called Benchmade, and I said, could you make that knife, this handle and that blade? And they said, sure, it'll be $184. This is like 20 years ago when $184 was a heck of a lot of money. I didn't buy it. I was in the store 6 months later. They had the exact knife, $39. $39. They're real expensive now. They've gone up on their prices on knives. I went to the store the other day, and a lot of their knives are $300. Whew. Yeah. Well, I threw away one of my favorite knives. I always carry my knife in my back pocket, and I had a pair of Levi's on that was really worn out, and I made up in my mind, when I get home, I'm going to throw these in the garbage. So I did. The next morning, I get up and I grab my wallet and my keys, and my knife's not there. I went, my knife is gone. I went, oh no, it's in my pants. About that time, I heard the garbage truck driving away. I went, oh crap. Okay, so I bring my tailstock up, put my knife back in my pocket. There we go. Now, double stick tape works a lot better if you'll let it sit for about a half a minute or a minute after you put the pressure on it. If you just stick something out there and hand hold it, it'll come off in a few minutes. But you put some pressure on it and let it set for a little bit. So what I do while it's holding itself is I'll take my gouge and I'll go in here and we'll get away whatever we can. I'm going to leave the smallest tenon. There we go. Now, what I do is, as I get toward that center, I'll rotate the gouge this way so the bottom wing is touching that tenon, and that way it doesn't cut it. If I leave it at this angle and I go in there, I can get a pretty nasty catch. But I'll just go ahead and rotate it so I don't get a catch. Well, what I want to do is I want to decide how I want those feet to look. Tell you what, here we go. Oh, that's going to be too bright. Okay, that's good. I've made myself some tools over the years, odds and end things. This one's kind of a bevel rubbing tool, a little bit, but it's bent at the left. I'll show you how to use that in a minute. The other one is an Allen wrench that I can use like this. I can put it against the tool rest and cut straight in, because the tailstock's in the way at that point. So you say, or I can take this one and I can ride the bevel. I'll use it as a scraper first and ride the bevel. Because what I'm trying to do ideally is I want to shape that bottom so it looks like the bottom is flowing through the feet. So if I can get rid of most of that wood, yep, I'm saving myself a lot of time. So now what we'll do is we're going to find out how good my tape is. Are y'all good catches? People in the front row? It's just double stick tape. It doesn't matter if it's clear. You got to have, you don't want the thick tape. You can use a cloth backed. Cloth backed is a little bit better because it's thicker. If I don't get that curve exactly right, it'll work. The other thing I do is if I'm doing any cutting, I usually tell people to not ride the bevel. I prefer the term glide the bevel. You want as little pressure on the bevel as you can because that allows you to feel the cut. If you can feel the cut, you're going to cut at the right speed, get a cleaner cut. This is different. I want all of my pressure to be this way. So even if I'm cutting in that direction, I'm pushing on the bevel. Normally I don't push on the bevel, but I want to push it into the tape. If I'm pushing this way, I'm going to pull it off the tape. Does that make sense? You know how I learned that? I did it wrong. So then what I want to do is, once I've gotten rid of most of the waste, and it's kind of hard to do, I try to visualize the bowl. And I want to visualize this curve blending into that curve, which is like that right there. Then I want to clean up the inside of the foot just a little bit with shear scraping. There we go. All right. Anybody want to see those? They're kind of weird. But I took a blacksmithing class years ago specifically to learn how to make tools. So I haven't, there's an article that I have in one of my videos on how to make Christmas ornament hollowing tools, the bent angle. And I show you how to harden the steel and anneal it and everything you need to know about that. Okay, so we need to decide where, I need to borrow your pencil again. Can't believe I didn't bring a pencil with me. There you go. Where it's supposed to be, exactly. So you decide how many feet you want, and I forgot to tell you how I started making feet. How many of you have gone in, you had a little thing like this, and you try to make that last cut, and you blow it out, and you get a blown out part on your little foot? In other words, you have a solid foot like this, and you go in there to make that cut, and you blow it out. I went, oh, crap. Then I went, well, wait a minute. Why don't I just blow it out in 3 other places and have feet? I started carving feet on it. So kind of go in here and you estimate foot size, whatever you want. The tricky part, and I have a little jig at home. Brian, I just forgot Brian's last name. I can't believe that. A friend of mine just passed away last year. He wrote an article. He was doing all these 3-sided boxes. Had 2 or 3 articles in Wood Turning Fundamentals on how to do that. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, he gave me a jig that you can put on there and you can mark exactly 120 degrees. So we're going to kind of guess here. I'm going to put a foot about right there. And we're going to put a foot about right there. Or you could do this. You could always draw a line through the center and then kind of do your 60 degrees. I'm pretty close. Yeah. So I'm going to mark here, and mark there, mark here, mark there. Yeah, that little Allen wrench that's bent 90 degrees, it is 90 degrees. Really handy when you want to cut an opening to put your chuck into, and your tailstock's in the way. Slide it in there like that. Don't remember who taught me that, but I didn't invent it myself. There you go. That's okay. That's all I needed. There are lots of ways to cut this. The reason I brought this one up is one of the things I want to talk about is we're going to carve feet onto the bottom of the bowl. You don't have to do that. You could turn a separate piece and glue it on, like I did on this one. Pretty handy. And not only that, since this is a separate piece, I could feasibly take this over to my scroll saw or my bandsaw and cut feet into it if I wanted to, because it's a separate piece. I could put it on there later. So that's pretty handy. This is a technique I learned from a lady. I was at John C. Campbell Folk School, and she cuts this out on the bandsaw. They don't have to be accurate. You could even cut it wider. When you glue it back together, you glue it back together with colored epoxy. Looks really cool. Super simple technique. Yep. And just, and you can leave as huge a gap as you want. It's really nice. I'm not a big epoxy fan. I don't like the shavings stick to my body. Then I go in the house and my wife fusses at me for tracking shavings in the house. It clogs up my dust collector because the shavings don't break up. They get on that gate. I got to pull the thing off the wall and clean all that out. It's just, and it's expensive. The other thing you can do, I'll pass these around. you can add a long finial on it and get a nice little bowl that's technically a foot, I guess. I just started doing these just recently where I turn a sphere. I was teaching a spear making class, and I decided I wanted to take it to the next level, so I started hollowing it out and texturing it, and then I decided to add an off-center turned foot to it. So it sits up like that. A lot of fun. So many directions you can go in wood turning, it's ridiculous. At home, I use an air saw. Air saws are designed for cutting metal. And the blades that you buy, the blades are too fine, so they just burn when you're trying to cut wood. You need a coarser tooth. But coarser tooth wood, saber saw or jigsaw blades won't fit in the air saws. The tang's too thick. So I take this to the grinder, I grind the tang down till it fits, drop it in there, works perfectly. The problem with air saws, of course, you got to have a compressor. They eat up air like crazy. I was at the yard sale just recently and I found this electric one. Pretty cool. The powered saws have some big advantages. They're very fast cutting. They also cut a mistake really, really fast. So what I do, most of the time I use a coping saw, and we'll do that here in a second. I have this jig. There's 2 or 3s on the market. This one came from Bestwood Tools. Bestwood Tools is like 50 miles from my house. So as soon as I found that out, I went over to meet Vic and had him make some tools for me. Pretty cool stuff. But one of the things he makes is this carving jig, and it comes with a faceplate that you can screw down to your workbench, but you can also buy it with size so it'll fit right in there and use it on the lathe, which is really handy. And you buy the insert to fit your chucks. There we go. There it is. Oh, I got it. How are we doing on time, by the way? I hadn't even looked. Okay. So what I do is I turn this thing. Now here, there's 2 of the ones on the market. This one has 2 controls. This one spins it. This one lets it swivel. The downside of that is sometimes this knob gets in the way. Trent Bosch's, you loosen up one knob, it does everything. The downside of that is sometimes it can be hard to position. When you're doing repetitive carving, this is really nice because I can loosen this up and I can just carve, and I'm carving at the same position all the time. Nothing ever changes. When you use Trent Bosch's, as soon as you loosen this up, it all wobbles. So you may have to change it a different way. Yeah, there you go. That'll work. I'll carve from that direction. Turn it right there. So anyway, I take my coping saw. Now, what you'll have to do is you can twist this blade. Like right now, it's cutting straight. You see how the handle's offset? So I offset it so that when I'm cutting across the bottom, the bowl doesn't get in the way. So start my cut, and you got to play with the different teeth patterns. This is almost too coarse of teeth for this thin foot that I made. When you cut as close as you dare, you don't want to overcut it. Let's break that off. And there we go. And then this is going really good today. It kind of fought me the other day when I was making that other bowl. Right, that transition from horizontal or vertical to horizontal is always a little challenging to get it to go. There we go. Now I try to push my hands against this to keep from breaking that tape joint. I always feel like when you're doing boring stuff like this, you should be singing or something to entertain the crowd. Yeah.
Just real quick, I forgot two things in announcements, guys. First, Tim Pace brought a, following system here for someone to buy, and they were going to, okay, good, we did not know this change. And, pay Phil, if you will, today. Number two is this bag is full of, sanding strips. So you help yourself, what's still here is going in the trash. Thank y'all.
Now what I just did was, like I say, when you go from horizontal to vertical or whatever, it wants to bind up the saw blade. So what I did was I made that cut till the saw got bound up. I went like this, cut it off. Now I've got it cleared and I can go in there and I can get the saw in a better angle to cut with.
Hey, John, I assume you're using a flat blade. If you tried those spiral or round,
I have them for my coping saw and for my hacksaw. They cut really, really slow. They're good when the saw that you need won't do anything else. But for this purpose, you're much better with an actual wood cutting blade. And this one was kind of coarse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10, I'd say 10 per inch. Probably would have cut this wood a little bit easier if I'd gone with maybe 16 per inch. Be a little slower, but it wouldn't grab. If your wood is thicker, you get more teeth in there, then it cuts a little bit better. Now I got all kinds of gadgets over the years. One other thing I wanted to show you, and I didn't do that a while ago. I built this indexing pin. And again, it won't fit on this lathe. But a lot of your chucks, like this one, see it's got those index pins in it? It's got holes in the back and holes in the side. When you're carving on wood, or sometimes when you're having to sand out, like if you've got to sand out a really bad spot, a tear out, I want to stop the lathe. I want to sand it with the lathe off. This will allow me to lock it in position and sand at any position. And what I can do is, I can twist it that way to work with an actual index wheel. I can twist it this way to work in the side of the chuck. I can twist it that way to work in the bottom of the chuck. It's a really handy gadget. bestwoodtools.com. Made out of Crossville, Tennessee. Vic was a master machinist. He moved from Florida. Well, actually, he's a master machinist, but he sold power machines. He moved to Crossville, and he built this big shop. And there was a guy named, I can't believe it, Willard Baxter. Willard Baxter had this wonderful shop down in Georgia where they host the Gainesville Wood Turning Club. And the guy that ran that shop had met Willard somewhere and said, you ought to make a threading jig. So he made a threading jig, which is the best one on the market. And after that, he started making tool rests and all kinds of accessories for wood stuff. He can make custom, if you need an adapter that's really weird, let's say you buy a lathe that's got, 16 TPI and you need it to go to 1 1/4 8, he can build you an adapter. And it's reasonably priced. They're not cheap, but they're reasonable. But he designed and built this. The downside of this one, I'll show you that in a second here. Let's get that out of the way. These handles are adjustable. If you turn it this way and I lock it down, and I'm carving this way, because it locks in that position, it comes unlocked. So all you have to do is, whenever you have to tilt it, you simply tilt it in the direction that when I put pressure on it, it's going to tighten it up. And it's never a problem. He had a lot of complaints of that when he first came out with this. You can buy all kinds of carving tools, wood rasps and everything else. This is a cheap rasp. Got it for $3 or $4 or $5 at Harbor Freight or whatever. I don't recommend them. They're crappy. They leave huge scratch marks, parallel scratch marks. This one, I don't know what they sell for now. It's a Nicholson. It's a Nicholson wood rasp, and it's got finer teeth. And it cuts really, really well. It still leaves kind of a pattern, but it cuts really well and really fast. Oh, I was going to talk to you about 3 and 4 teeth jaws. let's get the camera up here where we can see. If I have 4 feet and I'm trying to file this, what happens is I'm always cutting into another foot. So you can only file right here. I can't file all the way across the bottom. When you have 3 feet, if I angle it, I can miss the tooth. See, I can come over here, I can miss that tooth. So that's where 3 feet has an advantage as far as speeding up carving and making it easier. You could use hand carving tools to do this. Some woods it's okay, some woods it's really, really hard. This particular wood would be hard to do with carving hand chisels. You can use reciprocating carvers to do this. Rotary carvers, I find it hard to take away very much wood with a rotary carver. It takes a long time, and you're breathing all that dust. So you got to have some kind of dust collector or a mask on when you're doing that. But with these, I can get in here, make sure everything's locked. Yeah. So I just carve like that. And what I do is I carve until the little lines that I created are gone. It's almost right there. Also, all these files are designed to cut in that motion. You notice I was going back and forth, kind of okay to a point, but when you want to get a good clean cut, you want to cut in the direction the teeth cut in. So I go like that. And I'm trying to figure out how to blend it into the bottom that I turned. And I got pretty close there. Okay, let's go to another one. I'm not going to carve all of this because I planned to do 2 demos for you guys. The second demo is on turning pendants. Is anybody interested in those? I turn off-center pendants. And I just looked it up the other day because I did it for the other club. The article I wrote is in the May 2023 Wood Turning Fundamentals on how to turn these pendants. The really cool thing was, anybody know who George Wurzel is? George Wurzel is a blind wood turner. I met him in Minneapolis when I was teaching up there. He moved to California, taught woodworking out there, got really tired of all the smoke and nastiness, and moved to Gainesville, Tennessee. So now he lives about 2 hours from me. I haven't been able to visit him. But if you saw the old Subaru commercial where this young couple walks into this bar and they say, "We need to go to point so-and-so." And the bartender says, "Well, you can't get there from here." A blind guy at a table back over there walks over and says, "I can take you there." That's George. George is an amazing man. But anyway, he took my class. The first night at their club meeting, I was teaching how to do the pendants, and George couldn't attend it. He had something going on. So he asked he called one of his buddies and had him describe how I made the pendants. So George showed up the next morning for the class. We were doing a hand mirror class, and he had 3 pendants he made that night. I'm talking absolutely 0 scratches, sanded to perfection. I don't know how you do that. I'm going to talk about sanding here in a minute, but I was blown away. So George walks into the class the next morning, and he comes in and he goes, "Give me the lathe with the most light." He's totally blind. He's just that kind of guy. Pretty cool. Okay, I'll do one more real quick because they're going pretty fast today. And then we'll talk about the other ways of doing this. Oh, well, one of the ways, did I bring it or did I not bring it? Nope, I left it at home. Make yourself a bean bag. If you don't have all this kind of rig, a sandbag or a bean bag, you can lay that bowl down on top. Take this one. You can kind of lay the bowl down on top like that and reposition it, then hold it with your hands and do that sawing and carving. That works pretty well. This is better, but it's really expensive to buy one of those tools. Now, like I say, you won't be able to see it on the camera, but it leaves some pretty good scratches. It's kind of a coarse tool. I don't know how much these sell for today, but I'm guessing probably 40 or 50 bucks, something like that. You mean nobody stole them? You can get these tools. They've changed the manufacturer and name. The tools that I bought were called RU. Now Craft Supply, Woodcraft sells them under a different name. These are hand-cut teeth. I watched a guy do that on YouTube. That is so fascinating. But because they're hand-cut, they don't line up. The reason these cut the way they do and leave little scratches is the teeth are kind of alternating, but they don't line up. They line up too much, so they leave a pattern. You get a file like that, it doesn't leave a pattern. So I can go on here, and I can clean up all the tool marks that I just left with this one.
I think they say that number 11 is equivalent to 150 bricks.
Yeah. Well, it's, they're wonderful. They're about $80 a piece. They are not cheap.
Then you have to wait for it.
Yeah, could be. But if you don't have that, I found this somewhere. I have no idea where I bought it. I kind of think maybe it was Rockler. You can use sanding strips. It's got these little teeth that grip them. So you slide that in there like that, and you put that over there, and you slide this in like that. And then you tighten this up, and it kind of tensions the belt. There we go. And, you can put whatever grit you want on there. I bought a whole bunch of the grits for traveling, doing demos, so it's really handy. But I go in there, and what you do is you want a point source light. If you take a light like this, and you put it at an angle, now I can see all the scratches. I left quite a few with that other tool. But I can go in there and I can sand away those scratches, hopefully, and shape the bottom pretty close. What I hate is when I'm doing demos and I'm wearing a face shield, which is required at a lot of the places, and you want to blow away. It blows right back into the microphone and makes a tremendous noise. Kind of embarrassing when you do that. Okay, so let's say you can't find one of those somewhere.
Hey, John, before you go to the next step, will you show us again how you put the sandpaper on to the brass?
Onto this? Yeah, it's pretty obvious. It's got a screw, and when you loosen that screw up, these little jaws open up. So you slide it into the jaws, like there, put this side into the jaws. And there's like a groove in the bottom. I don't know if I can see that. Where are we? There. Do what? Yeah. And you just tighten this up. What it does, it goes down like that and pushes that sandpaper into those notches.
Is that a nickel?
No, I think this came from, it's called Practical Innovations. I think I bought it at Rockler years and years ago. I've had this for I don't know how many years. If you look around, you go to all the different stores. I found this one day. It cuts fairly well, and it was cheap. Just, got a whole bunch of grit on it. I'm always buying, if I find something at flea market or whatever, or think it'll work, I buy it. Yeah.
We have to use a fine for the last filing of it, fingernail file, about a little metal fingernail file, about so long.
Yep. Well, you can buy them. They do. I have a whole set of those at home. What I do is, for the most part, I use these paint stirrers. You can cut you cut the wood yourself if you wanted to on a bandsaw. I didn't have to use a paint stirrer. I cut them into a taper, and I use a spray adhesive, and I've tried a lot of spray adhesives. This one is the best. 3M Super 77. What's good about it, it's not any better than any of the others in terms of actual adhesion and all that. The tips don't clog. I buy these cans, $18 for a damn can, and the first time you use it, tip clogs up and you can't use it anymore. I get so frustrated. I've been using these now for 2 years, and I have yet to have the tip clog. When you finish spraying, you turn it upside down, spray it for a second, it clears out the tip, and you put it in the cabinet and you're done. Great stuff. But what I'll do is I'll spray this, I'll lay it on the sandpaper. I cut my sandpaper a little bit wide because you can use this to kind of sand against the foot. You know, you can sand both ways with it. And I mark them. Here's 150, there's 180, there's 220, there's 120. So, you know, whatever you need, and they flex. So when I'm doing the bowl, you know, if I push down on it, it's easy to follow that curve and get rid of all that. Is everybody kind of following that? And if you'll take a light and put it at the smaller your light source is, this is the way photography works. The smaller the light source is, the harder the shadow is. So you can see really, really fine cuts. So if you go through there and you see these little bitty cuts that are like right here, you know, I can take that 120 grit and work right there until I got rid of that. And right here, until that's gone. And that's pretty close. Could be fine-tuned more as far as the shape is concerned. But I use the coarse sandpaper and all my files and stuff to fine-tune the shape as best as I can get it. And then I'll just change the grits and go on up. One of my rule of thumb, and this is for sanding vessels as well as doing this, anytime I sand for more than 10 seconds to get rid of a scratch mark or a tear out or whatever, go to the next lower grit. No reason to waste your time sanding all day long with a grit that's too fine. It's hard sometimes, particularly when you get to, say, 220 grit or 320 grit, and then you see those scratches left by the 120 grit. It's hard to make yourself go back to 120, but it'll save you so much time if you do. And you just try to get all your scratches to be evenly deep and controlled. Anybody have any questions so far? Well, like I say, if you don't use the hot glue, you just do that and it comes off. Mineral spirits will clean up any adhesive left by that stuff. Very quick to do. Anybody have any questions? Thank you. Like I say, everybody take a break. We'll come back and we'll do the off-center pendant. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, remind me to talk about using the router. I'll lay this up here so I don't forget.
This is the 80, and where did you get it?
Woodcraft,
Woodcraft.
$80 or more. They've gone up in price. They're just, one year, you know, I got that 10% discount for your birthday. They had a set of 3 little miniature, like needle files. It was $187. I sprung for it. I went, I don't do this often. That's a whole heck of a lot of money.
I like the little styles because
Oh, they're fantastic.
I do those Christmas tree ornaments. I clean them out. He turns them. I clean them up.
I make a lot of ornaments. I decorated the governor's Christmas tree about 4 years ago with ornaments. And I have 85 on my tree at home, and every one of them is different. I do a lot of inside-out turning and all that kind of stuff to really enhance them.
Do inside outside anymore. We had done one for a long time.
They're fun. Oops.
That $80 proof too at Woodcraft. That's
No, the file. The, I think I bought that at Walmart. A lot of times they don't carry the better brands, but my local hardware, Ace Hardware, carries it.
Where was your sander? That's one thing.
Oh, this thing? Yeah.
Oh, okay, there it is. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I don't know where to find those. I haven't gone out to look, but it sure is handy. Oh, hey.
My dad, a long time ago, had a makeshift lathe, and he made all of his cutting tools out of Allen wrenches or files.
Yep.
Had a grinder.
Yeah, the problem with using a file is the files are brittle, and if you get a catch, they don't just break off, they shatter. Could hurt you. So what I have people do is you put the file in the oven at 425 degrees, let it set for a half hour, turn the oven off, come back tomorrow morning. You've reduced the hardness down to about 58 to 60 Rockwell, and now it'll just break off, it won't shatter.
Well, we turn mostly pine wood, so
Yeah.
it wasn't a problem.
Well, and most people that used files for tools, the files were pretty thick, and the odds of you breaking it are pretty slim. I have a whole set. I was at the flea market one day, and this guy that sold nuts and bolts and everything else, he had a bucket full of files. And I was walking by, I looked down, I went, that looks like a turning tool. So I picked it up, and I dug through there, and I picked up 7 tools, all handmade, all ground to be carved, but they're all files. So I bought that whole set for like 50 cents a piece. And I did a demo one time at the club meeting. We were talking about tools. And I said, I use state-of-the-art tools, and I pulled all those up, and I turned that whole project with those files.
That's the way I learned. Thank you very much.
What was the brand of this again?
Nicholson.
Nicholson.
You know, so this is a company that makes all the files.
Yeah. I went out to Stillwater, Oklahoma last year to learn how to do a self-bow.
Uh-huh.
And I think that was the same one that they were
Uh-huh.
recommending. Nicholson.
I was a big archery person.
Well, I like the bow nut, and I like the woodwork. Actually, I cut a boat off tree down. I had a friend that makes bows, and I got on Facebook and found this site, Oklahoma Self-Bow Society. Actually, I just put a question on there like, how do I need to split this up for staves or recommendations? And the guy said, what you ought to do is drive out to Stillwater in 2 weeks. We're having our year three. We'll teach you how to make one. So I loaded up the old sprinter van and went. I'm glad I did.
I've always wanted to make one. I built arrows, I built bowstrings, I got into leather work, made my own quivers and gloves, you know. I don't know how to do any hobby a little bit.
Well, that's me, and I haven't. You know, when I got there, when I come home, like I'm gonna really start doing this. I have because I don't have a draw horse, you know, and I want to do it.
Yeah.
I did all hand tools. That's the one I made,
Oh yeah, cool.
and I just stippled. I tried to wrap rawhide on it, and I just couldn't get it to lay like I wanted, so I just stippled it. That gives it texture.
Yep, yep.
And they with some Tocobolo overlay.
Pretty cool, yeah.
And I'm shooting it, so
Yep.
I haven't killed anything.
What's your poundage on it?
About 50 pounds.
Oh, okay.
50 pounds of a 28 draw.
Uh-huh.
Something's getting shot this year. It may be in the gut.
I made my neighbor, he's a bow hunter.
Yeah.
I made my neighbor an arrow with a car on it,
Yeah.
with headlights. I said, you point this at a deer, he's gonna see those headlights and hold perfectly still.
Guaranteed.
So you can shoot him. He loved it. The what? Oh, there it is, yeah.
As I always said, take what you like. Is there a particular double say? You just don't have to just get a thin.
Now, I mean, this is really good stuff, and I don't know the brand. You might be able to read some of it. Any of the really thin tapes, you know, some of them come real thick with a sponge back. You don't want that.
Don't want the sponge
Yeah.
back.
You want the cloth back or this type here. I used to use the cloth back a lot. I don't have it anymore. And so I tried this to do this method, and it worked fine. So cool.
John, do you know why a milking stool has 3 legs? Because the cow's got the other.
Oh, somebody hit him.
He almost did.
I almost got it. I just told him that was utterly ridiculous.
Yeah. I used to have a friend when I was in the Air Force. I was in the Air Force choir at Keesler Air Force Base. And one of the guys was really bad about telling puns all the time. We told him that's 2/3 of a pun, the P and the U. Good grief. I've never thrown sparks with an Allen wrench before.
Oh, you just did?
That thing snapped and it.
How big?
You was looking for a pencil a while ago and you were talking about your knife. I had a friend of mine that's dead now, but he carried a pencil about that long and a knife in his pocket everywhere he went. Always had,
Like I said,
and he always had something sharp with it.
I carried a German commando knife, which was pretty much just like this, except it didn't have any handles. So it's very thin. They call it a boot knife. And I carried that for a long, long, long time. And I still have it. It's in my knife drawer. But I'm always looking for the best knife. I was at Smoky Mountain Knife Works looking for knives. And I narrowed it down to 2. One of them was made by Bill Gerber. The guy says, well, Bill's downstairs signing knives. I thought, great, so I'll take that one. So I take the knife, I go downstairs, he signs it, and I'm walking to the car, and I went, well, I can't use this. It's a collector's item. So then I had to go buy another one.
Now we can't use it.
Yeah.
I lost a bench-made knife at Swamp last year. Nice. Actually, on the way, it was black. It had that black carbon thing, blue, bright blue accents on it. That had B90 steel. Laid it on a black dresser in a hotel room. Walked out without it. I called them that morning. I said, I left the knife in room so-and-so. I know I did. They said, we hadn't found it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't turn it in. So I bought my wife one. Well, since I lost mine, I carried hers. And I had her name engraved on it.
Oh, yeah. I had a Randall knife. You know, during the Vietnam War, that was the most popular knife there was.
I remember those
I saved my money and I bought one. Well, somebody broke into my house, stole that knife. I turned it in for insurance. And anyway, so I was able to buy another one. This time I had my name engraved on it. But I never use it. It sits in the box.
So now Mickey goes, do you have my knife? Always, because I can't afford another one.
Yeah.
I can't afford another one.
I can't believe how expensive they've gotten. I don't think they had a knife under $200 now.
It was a bug out just like this one. It had the carbon handles and the B90 steel.
Yeah.
But talk about short and stay short.
Okay. If everybody can grab a seat, we'll get started. All righty. Everybody's talking. When you, to make these pendants, what happened was there was an article in Wood Turning Magazine. I'd written a couple articles for Wood Turning Magazine over the years. And there's an article in there on how this guy turned these pendants.
Hey guys, we're starting again.
Anyway, so I read
Quiet, please.
Yeah, it's okay. So I read the article and I was fascinated by it. And about 2 or 3 years before that, a friend had given me this scrap of wood. It was this color plywood, and it was about this thick, about this long, and tapered to a point. He said, "You're the only person I know might find some use for that." Well, it sat in a drawer forever. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I read that article on how this guy was making pendants, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, I can modify my chuck, and I can do an advanced version of that. And do a tapered pendant. So first thing you got to do is you got to go out and buy yourself a 2-jaw chuck. Anybody own one of those? Yeah. Anyway, I just repaired a 6-jaw chuck. I've never seen one of those. 6-jaw wood turning chuck. Guy had damaged it. I had a hell of a time getting it apart, and I had to put it on my metal lathe and threw some stuff up. But anyway, I got it working. But anyway, what it dawned on me was, if I take 2 jaws off, I can put a piece of wood in there, and I can either slide it back and forth to turn patterns in the wood. I can tilt it out this way. You have all kinds of options that you wouldn't have using a 4-jaw chuck. So, so I did that demo somewhere. Maybe I put a thing online, I think, how to do it. Jim Duxbury saw it, a friend of mine. He's the guy that makes the thing that looks like a scuba mask for dust prevention or whatever. You put that thing in your mouth and and it covers your nose. You don't breathe anything. Anyway, Jim modified my jig, and he put a hole in it. You put this on there. When you clamp the 2 jaws down, it clamps this down so it won't move. Now you could rotate it. I put lines on there. I can rotate it over here 15 degrees, make a cut, rotate it back this way, make 15 degrees in the other direction, exactly the same. So it has some really cool things you can do on it. Now I put a stop on mine that he didn't do on his. So when I slide it in, this is exactly centered when it hits my chuck. So there's lots of fun can be had with that. But I'll pass that around, then you can watch my technique here and you'll understand what I do with them. I use the double stick tape. Earliest ones I did, I used hot glue. And again, hot glue has a problem of it's kind of hard to get off the piece sometimes. But I'll put a piece there and a piece here. One day I was on there, I was trying my best to get this to separate, and I couldn't get it. And it turns out I actually had gotten it the very first try. I thought that tape was so clear, I thought it was peeling the tape off along with the backing, and I kept trying to get it off. And it wasn't.
What kind did you say that for?
I don't know. Fast Edge is the name, www.fastedge.com, and it's called High Performance. See if one of them has a name. That's okay. They call it Fast Edge Speed Tape. I've got 3 or 4 brands at home, and near as I can tell, they all work. Oh, one of the things I want to talk to you all about, I do routing on the lathe. So when I wanted to do some raised legs all the way up, I thought, why don't I use my router to do that? My router and my index wheel. So I put it on there. My router sits on a platform. It's in my tool rest, and it slides back and forth, and there's a stop on there that it follows. So I adjust the tool rest until it's the angle I want, and then what I did was I locked the lathe in a certain position, and I run the router up through there, and I create a cut. I move it to 1 notch on my index wheel, make another cut, move it another notch, make another cut. After I'd made all the notches to where I cut from this leg all the way to this leg, I disconnected my index wheel, and I held the router up there, and I just went like this, back and forth, stopping at that same point all the time. And that cleared up all of this without me having to carve it. It went so much faster doing it that way. I still had to reverse turn it and turn this shape, but that was and I have a video on how to do that. I got 2 or 3 videos on how to use a router on the lathe. Hope that doesn't burn out what I'm doing.
Is that on your YouTube? Is that on your YouTube?
Yeah, John Lucas Woodturner. You don't have a pencil? Hey, a knife works. What I do is I bring the tailstock up. I found the center of my blank. I put that on there like that, and I come up here and push it against it. And again, I let it set for however long. Now you can glue up veneers. I'm using some color ply for this, but you can glue up veneers to get the thickness you want and get all kinds of cool patterns when you cut through the veneers. A lot of fun. I meant to bring my box of pendants to show everybody, and I didn't. Do it? I had a box full of pendants to show y'all what you could do, and it's sitting on my workbench. Doesn't do a lot of good here. Okay, so that was the center. what I want to do is, I want to make a tapered pendant. So what I do is I'll loosen up my jaws, and I'll tilt this out. And then I take a tool, like a straight edge, and I hang it up there like that, and I go, that's not enough tilt. So I loosen it up and I move it a little further. I hold my plumb bob like that, and go, that works pretty good. So take tool rest. Oops. Yeah, that'll work right there. Okay. Now the first thing I do is face it off. Anybody turned any of this color ply? Dulls an edge really quickly. We used to be able to get it, and we can't anymore. There was a gun stock company that uses this to make gun stocks out of, and they throw away all the scraps, put them in a big box. We'd buy that huge box, pallet full, for like $50. And then we'd sell them to the club members pretty cheap. So there are lots of weird sizes, so you can't make big things with it. But it's perfect for this. What I do is I cut that down until the top is the thickness I want. And on something like this, you can kind of look at how the patterns are starting to appear. See how I'm getting 2 or 3 lines? And this is not quite true yet, so I'll end up getting 3 lines on there apparently, if I go that route. Now once you've got it faced off and you've got it the thickness you want, and you can, this part right here is what you're worried about, is how thick that is. I want it a little bit thinner, I think. Yep, so we'll go. One more pass. I can make that famous last cut. I'm going to make one more cut. You know how I've found to avoid that problem? You lie to the wood. You tell it, I'm going to do 2 more cuts. And you do that last cut, and then you quit. And that way, you don't have that problem. Kind of like when you lose your keys and you tell everybody it was the last place I looked. Well, if you look one more place, it's not the last place. You have to cut into your scrap block a little bit. Let's see if that's correct. Yes, it is. No, not quite round yet. Almost. One more cut. Now I like the back of my pendant to be rounded off a little bit. Oh, I forgot to tell you. What I'll usually do is I'll take that scrap of wood, whatever it is, and I'll sand the back. Sometimes I'll actually glue it on here and I'll turn details in the back. And then put the double stick tape on there. Then you got something nice on both sides of the pendant in case it bounces around. Got one more pass on there apparently. So what I do, I want to round that off a little bit. I use a spindle gouge, and let's move this in as close as I can get it. There we go. And I start rounding that off a little bit. All right, and we'll round this off. One thing we're talking about sharpening earlier, one way I found to see if your tool is sharp, if you can take off like 1/1000th of an inch or 2 or 3/1000ths of an inch, you know it's sharp. If you're trying to make a really thin cut like that and the tool wants to bounce out, it's not sharp. What I'm learning when I teach classes anyway, when you're using a really fine wheel, like I said earlier, you can get just as fine a cut with 36 screw as you can with 350. Why would you use 350? Well, 2 reasons. One is, takes off less metal, so your tool's going to last longer. And you know, that's the main reason. My mind just went blank. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, one of the problems I found with using 600 or 1,000 grit wheels is if you're not really, really good at sharpening, when you put the tool on there and you go through the jig and do whatever, you may not have sharpened all the way to the absolute edge because it's taken off so little metal. But if you go down to 350, 250, or 180, you're almost guaranteed that you're going to get all the way to the edge and get a sharp tool. So I've done this. You always sand. I'm not going to sand, but I'm going to do some shear scraping. All right. So you sand it while it's at this piece right here. Now I want to have an off-center circle. So anybody got a pencil again? I keep losing pencils today. There we go. What I do is, I have these circle jigs that I bought at the art store. It's designed, you can lay them down, they got every kind of circle you can imagine. So I'll lay it on here and I'll decide I want my circle to be about, maybe a little bit bigger than that. About that size right there. So I figure out what the center is, or at least get pretty close to it. And I glued my blank on incorrectly, so I'm going to have trouble doing that. That's okay. Yeah, that's the thin part right there. Wheel. I got in a hurry and glued it on wrong. So what I want to do is, I want to keep this at the same angle it is in terms of flat this way, but I'm going to move it off center.
That block of wood is not the same with the round piece of it.
No, this is a flat piece of wood, yeah, scrap piece. So what I've done, I moved it off center a little bit. Let's see where my center's right there. That's going to make a circle about like that. So I want to go off center a little bit further. And I want to keep that parallel, as close as I can anyway. Gotta go a little further. I'm getting it out of parallel. Okay, that'll work. That'll work. I'll put this over here. So anyway, you kind of decide where you want, how far off center you want your hollow part. And you could use a drill to start this if you wanted to, Forstner bit or something. I typically just use my spindle gouge. If you're dead center, you can cut right straight in, just like a drill. Oops, something just slid. Thought I had that tight. There we go. When you start from the outside, cut in, it's really difficult because you're only hitting once per revolution and it wants to fight you, so you got to be real careful. Rub the bevel. This is just like I would hollow a box. When I see that white wood, I know I've gone deep enough. So then I stop and look and see how big my circle is. And it's a little tiny bit small, but not much. Now what I do is I want the back side of that hole to be tapered also. So I'll put the tool in there really deep and I'll use that bottom wing and scrape it. There we go, not bad, a little bit more right there. All right, that'll work. Now for interest's sake, what I'm going to do is, and this is a little bit easier if you'll take a skew, use it sideways, and cut a little groove. I'm going to do it really carefully with the toe here. Barely starting, there we go. See how big a notch I made. That's not bad. Now what I could do is, if you can see how that notch is off center, I'll move that light away. Yeah, there we go. It's actually seeing all my pencil lines. I should have sanded those off. What I can do is tilt it another direction and create a different arc on there. So you can go back and forth. That's the thing about Jim Duxbury's jig, is being able to rotate it. I can duplicate those cuts on both sides, which looks really cool. This one, let's do it. Let's see what happens if I go loosen that up and tilt it out that way right there. Don't move anything except that. And we'll make another cut about right there. There we go. Kind of made it on both sides doing that. But you can do 2 or 3 cuts, whatever you want to do to, if it's a plain wood, you can do cuts in it, you can do texturing tools. If it's color ply, you just cut into it till you create that. But there's just all kinds of options depending on how you locate it and how you twist it.
How thick do you normally carry pendants?
They're probably a little bit thinner than this. I would say a 5/16, kind of a fat 1/4 of an inch on the thin side, thick sides, whatever. They look nice like that when they're tapered, I think.
Are those made to wear around you?
Yeah, what I do is I use these straight earring pieces that you can buy at Hobby Lobby or whatever. They've got a loop on the end. They're about 2 inches long. I cut them off and I drill a hole that size and stick them through there. Usually CA glue, what I do is I dip the ornament hanger, I call them an ornament hangers, they're actually jewelry pieces. I dip those in the medium CA, pull it out, and then slide it down in there. There's just enough glue on it to hold. If I'm kind of leery about it, I stick about a 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch through, and I'll take a screwdriver and go in there and mash it. So it's actually got a bend that goes up inside, and it's real solid and works fine. Or if I leave the ornament solid, if I leave this solid instead of drilling a hole through it, I'll buy those pendant pins and glue them to the back. Because I do a lot of them that are just solid. I don't necessarily do all this. I do the little grooves on both sides, or I color them. I do the same kind of techniques you would do on your spinning tops to create patterns and textures and colors. But that's it. I mean, the only difference that I do from other people is I do this taper. And I could have accentuated it a lot more if I'd really gone through with it. But anybody have any questions?
Are you the one that thought about taking the 2 jaws off that? I should have thought about that years ago.
Yep. No, I was watching that article that this guy wrote on turning pendants, and I went, if you take 2 jaws off, you can slide it. You don't have to just tilt it. You can slide it and do all kinds of cool things, And if you ever break one of these, yeah, if you ever break one of these, you got another set.
Be sure you had your taper, like, when you put a thin piece of wood behind your board.
Well, if you want to do repeated cuts, where you take it off and put it back on, yeah, you can put something through there, a pencil or anything that spaces and gives it the exact same angle. What I typically do at home, and I didn't do it today, is I'll tilt this out and I'll drop a string down and I'll draw a pencil line. And then I can look at it and see exactly how thick this is versus this.
Even moving it in your chuck would keep the same
Yeah.
angle on it.
Yep. I mean, you don't have to. You could change that angle because it'll just cut differently is all it'll do when you do that. So that, yep. There's so many possibilities. That's why when Jim Duxbury saw that, saw my article and said, "Hey, I can modify that and take it to the next step." That's how people do it, you know. Pretty. Yeah. I saw him at SWAT. He said, "John, come here. I got to show you something." Showed me that. I went, "That's so cool." Anyway, if you don't have any questions, that's it.
Not bad, huh, guys? Great teacher, we sure appreciate
For a starter.
Thank you so much. No questions, everybody's good? I would like to go ahead and while we're all here, we took a break a minute ago, so let's go ahead and get our
Kate, those cuts on both sides, which looks really cool. This one, let's do it. Let's see what happens if I go loosen that up and tilt it out that way right there. Don't move anything except that. And we'll make another cut. About right there. Here we go. Kind of made it on both sides doing that. But you can do 2 or 3 cuts, whatever you want to do to, if it's a plain wood, you can do cuts in it, you can do texturing tools. If it's color ply, you just cut into it till you create that. But there's just all kinds of options depending on how you locate it and how you twist it.
How thick do you normally turn your pendant?
They're probably a little bit thinner than this. I would say a 5/16, kind of a fat 1/4 of an inch on the thin side, thick sides, whatever. They look nice like that when they're tapered, I think.
Are those made to wear around you?
Yeah, what I do is I use these straight earring pieces that you can buy at Hobby Lobby or whatever. They've got a loop on the end. They're about 2 inches long. I cut them off and I drill a hole that size and stick them through there. Usually CA glue, what I do is I dip the ornament hanger, I call them an ornament hangers. They're actually jewelry pieces. I dip those in the medium CA, pull it out, and then slide it down in there. There's just enough glue on it to hold. If I'm kind of leery about it, I stick about a 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch through, and I'll take a screwdriver and go in there and mash it. So it's actually got a bend that goes up inside, and it's real solid and works fine. Or if I leave the ornament solid, if I leave this solid instead of drilling a hole through it, I'll buy those pendant pins and glue them to the back. Because I do a lot of them that are just solid. I don't necessarily do all this. I do the little grooves on both sides, or I color them. I do the same kind of techniques you would do on your spinning tops to create patterns and textures and colors. But that's it. I mean, the only difference that I do from other people is I do this taper. And I could have accentuated it a lot more if I'd really gone through with it. But anybody have any questions?
Are you the one that thought about taking the 2 jaws off that? I should have thought about that years ago.
Yep. No, I was watching that article that this guy wrote on turning pendants, and I went, if you take 2 jaws off, you can slide it. You don't have to just tilt it. You can slide it and do all kinds of cool things, And if you ever break one of these, you got another set.
Be sure you had your taper, like, when you put a thin piece of wood behind your board.
Well, if you want to do repeated cuts, where you take it off and put it back on, yeah, you can put something through there, a pencil or anything that spaces and gives it the exact same angle. What I typically do at home, and I didn't do it today, is I'll tilt this out and I'll drop a string down and I'll draw a pencil line. And then I can look at it and see exactly how thick this is versus this.
Even moving it in your cup would keep the same
Yeah.
angle on it.
Yep. I mean, you don't have to. You could change that angle because it'll just cut differently is all it'll do when you do that. So that, yeah, there's so many possibilities. That's why when Jim Duxbury saw that, saw my article and said, "Hey, I can modify that and take it to the next step." That's how people do it, you know. Pretty. Yeah, I saw him at SWAT. He said, "John, come here. I got to show you something." Showed me that. I went, "That's so cool." Anyway, if you don't have any questions, that's it.